Okay, and welcome to this week's video. This week's video, we're going to start learning about the 7 steps of writing. These 7 steps should be a really easy way of becoming better writers so that your stories make sense, have a really good structure to them, and that you feel more comfortable about writing a story that's interesting and that people really enjoy. The first step we're going to focus on today, step 1, plan for success. And what this means is that your story that you write is going to find it really hard to write a story off the top of your head as you're going in the middle of a test or whenever you're doing your writing without this planning stage. Now, the planning stage quite often gets glossed over, or we move through it really quickly, or we make you write mind maps which are quite confusing for you to actually use. So when you actually do start writing your work, you don't even look at your plan and you start writing anyway. So today we're going to go through how we can write a plan that you actually use, and by the time you start writing, you know exactly what you're going to write and you feel comfortable and confident that your story is going to be helpful. So let's get started. So today we're going to learn to plan a complete story that includes all the elements needed to write an interesting story. So this whole thing about all the elements, so you don't just have a really great start and a really good complication and then your story falls away at the resolution because it's like we all woke up and it was a dream, or the story gets fixed too quickly. We're going to try to figure out a way in which our story makes sense from start to finish. So this is the structure. I know it looks quite confusing for now, but don't get confused by it yet. We'll go through it together. So basically, this is the story graph. Your title of your work goes here, which is pretty easy, whatever your title is going to be. Please don't spend too much time in anything you're writing trying to come up with an interesting title. It's really not that important. I wouldn't waste any time on that. So when we're writing any story graph, the story graph goes like this. Now, the line down the bottom is the timing of the story. So this would be the start of the story, the early part, the middle of the story, and towards the end. So this line here is the time of the story, and this part here is how interesting or exciting your story gets. So you can see up here that the story starts quite exciting already. It doesn't start in like a once upon a time or one day or there once was a man called this or on the weekend. It usually starts really exciting. We're going to start with what's called a sizzling start. Now we'll get back to that in a sec, but basically sizzling start means we're starting the audience off straight away. They're into the story, they know they're hooked and they want to keep reading. Then you can see it takes a slight dip down here, which we're going to call the backfill, and we're going to get to that in a sec. And then as you can see, slowly the story gets more and more tense and a little bit more and more exciting all the way up to the really big climax of the story, which would be right here in the climax of the story, and then it kind of just dips down and flattens out here towards the end. And we're going to go through how you actually can make that story make sense like that. So let's start at the sizzling start. Now the sizzling start is how every story should start. Your sizzling start means it's either going to start with action, a flashback, or dialogue. Now we'll go into this later on in a separate video about how to write your sizzling starts, but basically know that in your sizzling start I would have something happening, so action, so it could be something falling or banging or crashing. A flashback, so you're basically talking about or a flash forward, so you're already talking about somewhere where you're in the middle of the problem where something's already happened and you're like, well, let's start at the beginning. Or dialogue, you could have a character talking to another character already, so people are trying to catch up and they're trying to understand what's going on, but we've got them hooked. Okay, so we'll come back to that and we'll write that soon. Now we have the backfill. Now the backfill basically is the part that you would usually start. A lot of you would usually start your stories with first, which is basically where you fill in who the people in the story are, where the story's set, what's going on. I think I wrote where twice. Sorry, no, I didn't. The backfill is where you fill in the who, the where, the when, and the why. So when it's set, why this is happening, what their world looks like, who the main characters are. You got to make sure you do that. What a lot of people do is they start with a sizzling start and they go straight into their problem and they forget to talk about the premise of the story and how that world is created within itself. Then we have what's called the pebble problem. Now, your complication in your story is going to be set up into 3 different sections. The pebble, the rock, the boulder. And like I went through in class, your pebble problem is the assumption that if you're sitting up in a tree and there's someone trying to get you down and they throw a pebble at you, it might be a little bit like annoying and it's sort of, you might be a little bit frustrated by it. It might cause a bit of complication, but you're usually going to be able to overcome that problem. The rock problem, if you're sitting up in the tree and they throw a rock at you, that's going to be quite a lot harder to sort of get out of the way of, and it's going to be, you know, pretty hard, just like the rock problem in your story. So the second problem is obviously getting worse, and you can sort of try to overcome it, but you're starting to get a little bit more worried because this seems to be a lot harder to deal with. And the last one is like someone throwing a full boulder at you while you're sitting up in a tree, and how you're going to be how are you going to be able to overcome that, which is quite difficult. So that should be like someone's throwing this huge boulder over the tree, there's no way to escape it. So as I wrote here, the pebble problem is usually the start of the complication. It's usually the start of what is to come throughout the story. The rock problem is usually much bigger and it's starting to get a bit out of hand for the main character. The story should be getting a little bit more tense for that character and we're a little bit more worried. And the boulder problem is huge. The audience needs to be questioning how or even if your character can overcome this. You should be going, oh my gosh, how are they going to get over it? Able to get out of this? Are they going to be able to get out of this? Then we have up here the exciting ending. The exciting ending is usually where this climax, this boulder problems get out of control and almost you're giving up. And just before you give up, the most exciting part of the story is when just before the worst part, something good happens or something happens to get you out of the story. But it should also make sense. So you can't just have this happen, this happen, this happen. Oh, and it was really, really scary. Oh, and it's just a dream. It's really a cop-out to everybody else. And that wouldn't be a good way to finish the story. And then we have a character wrap-up, which we quite often forget to do, which is basically at the end of the story when we've sort of wrapped it all up, how is the emotional resolution? So basically, how are the main characters of the stories? What's their response to this problem being solved? How are they dealing in the aftermath of this problem that's gone on and now been fixed? And often they'll learn something about themselves. So they might have been really selfish here, and then that sort of come to sort of their selfishness has sort of caused a lot more problems, or their laid back nature or their forgetful nature has caused a lot of problems, and then somehow they've learned something about themselves throughout this journey, throughout the story graph. So that's basically what it is. So I'm going to explain to you now how I want you to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a scenario of how I would plan it out with a writing prompt that you could get in that plan, and how would you use it. And I'm even going to give myself my 5 minutes of planning time like you get in that plan, so you can see how I would do it in the 5 minutes. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so I'm going to start my writing prompt. My writing prompt today is you need to write a story using the word lost as the prompt. You can choose to write a story about whatever you would like, but it needs to be interesting and have the structure of a narrative. You have 5 minutes to plan. Good luck. Okay, so basically my story has to be something about the word lost. So what I'm going to do before I even start is I'm just going to quickly spend 1 minute before I even start to think of a story, trying to brainstorm some ideas about what it could be lost. So, okay, let's go. So I could write lost keys, it could be lost pet, it could be lost as in lost in the jungle, I'm thinking maybe. It could be lost, where else could it be lost? Lost in like life, so you don't know where you're going. So maybe you're feeling lost in your life, like you have no direction in your life. Lost as in you're lost at the shops. Okay, already out of these ones, I'm having a look. I think that would be the life one would be a bit too hard for me to do. The jungle one I could probably do. The keys one seems a bit boring to me. I just don't know how that problem's going to get worse. Lost at the shops. Once again, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, yeah, the lost at the shops could be good, but I don't know how that problem's going to become a pebble, rock, and a boulder. It's just sort of a bit of a problem. I can't imagine in my head. Now, like I said, this doesn't mean it's the right way. I'm just trying to go through my thinking. I can't clearly see this idea of how lost at the shops would work. Lost at the jungle, lost pet. Well, lost pet would be bad, but I'm thinking what would happen if it wasn't my pet. So what if it was lost and it was a friend's pet? Oh, yeah, I like that one. Okay. All right, let's go that one. Okay, so I'm going to make a decision pretty quickly within that minute or so. Now, it doesn't have to be that quick with you, but I'm going to come up with this idea. It's going to be about a friend's lost pet. So let's plan out my story in the 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to start the timer now, and then we'll see. If I can't get there, then obviously it's pretty obvious that I've done it wrong, but let's see. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it can be done. So let's get started. All right. Yep, okay. Sorry. Start. How do I start this? Does that work? Looks like it should be working. There we go. Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, let's go. So, sizzling start. Okay, I'm gonna fill in the backfill first because that's my who, what, and when. My main character called Jack, and Jack is looking. Jack is looking after Sam's dog for the weekend. Sam is best friend. What else do I need to know? I need to know Jack is forgetful. Sam's dog is his world. Okay, cool. All right. Now, basically, so that's setting up this idea that Jack is looking after Sam's dog, and Sam's his best friend. And Jack's super forgetful, but Sam's dog is his everything. I didn't write a dog's name. I should put dog is Max. Cool. All right. Now I'm setting up this idea that we're already seeing that their characters coming through. So one's forgetful, and the other one loves his dog. But I'm ready to keep going because my time's running out. My sizzling start is going to be Jack is sweating about looking after Sam's dog as he has never looked after a pet before. Now I'll show you how I make that sizzling next time, but we'll get back to that. Okay, so the pebble problem, what this can be. So we're going to, that Jack, well, his first problem is that he cannot find Max in the house. So you can see that's a smallish problem. It's not a huge problem yet because he could still be somewhere. The rock problem is that, sorry, I'm trying to click on this, but for some reason the text isn't working. Okay, let's try that. Jack sees that Max has been running around the neighborhood. Cool. So you can see there's a lot you could do here. Jack, he could be running through everyone else's yard. He could be going through people's fences, going through the bins. So he's already freaking out now, and he's wondering whether he'll be able to get him back. The big problem of the story is that Jack finds Max inside Coles running through the aisle, and maybe the shopkeeper takes Max away. So you can see how that would be getting worse. So not only is he now at the start, he thought, oh, he could still be around, but he's just not in the house. He's freaking out a little bit. Now he sees him running around, and he's so worried because he's like, oh no, Sam's going to get so upset. Then not only does he see that, he sees him run through Coles, and he's running through, tipping over stuff, ruining stuff that he knows he's going to have to pay for. And then when the shopkeeper takes him away, he thinks his time's over. So when you go back to here up into the exciting ending, oops, let's get rid of that. Jack goes home to come up with excuse for Sam. Max turns up just as Jack is about to tell him. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I'm going to try to think of that later. But basically, as soon as Jack goes to tell his best friend, hey, guess what? I lost your dog. Somehow the dog runs back through the door. We don't really know how at this point. And the emotional wrap-up is that Jack is super relieved. He also, sorry for spelling, didn't tell Sam. So Sam asks him to do it next week again. Okay. Oh, what timing. How good was that? I'm actually quite happy with that. Okay, so basically let's have a look here. So we've got here At the start of the story, Jack's sweating. He's already freaking out because he has to look after his best friend's dog, and he knows that his friend loves the dog. Then we go back and we explain how this happened, that he had to go away for the weekend, and so he gave him the job of looking after him. And then the problems start. He can't find him in the house when he's trying to feed him for dinner. You're going to make this more as you go along. You're not just going to use this, but this is a good basis. Then after that, you start seeing him run around the neighborhood, terrorizing all the neighbors and stuff like that. Then he finds him going through Coles, and he realizes he's running up and down the aisle and stuff like that. And then after that, when he goes back home to tell him, he decides he's going to come up with an excuse, or he's going to tell him the truth. And he's like, "I'm sorry, Sam, I've got something to tell you." And Sam's like, What have you got to tell me? He said, "I'm really sorry, I tried really hard." And then the dog runs back through the doorway, and then we see that Sam's like, "What did you have to tell me?" And Jack's like, "Oh, nothing, I forgot to feed him, I was a bit late." And then we can see at the end, he's super relieved he didn't have to tell Sam. And then he asks him, "Hey, you want to do it again next week?" And Jack has to give him an answer. I don't really know that. Maybe that even just ends on a cliffhanger. So you can see that this story here, you're making sure when you're planning, you're going to make sure that your story is going to have all of these elements. It's going to have this sizzling start. It's going to have the story being told, like who is in the story and where they are. And then it's going to make sure that your three events get more and more tense as they go along and actually have a decent ending with a resolution at the end. I think this is the best way that I've realized in my teaching, the best way I can try to explain to kids how to plan a story out that makes sense. If you have any feedback on this, let me know. A lot of these different elements, I'm going to be making videos as we go along. This is just the planning aspect, but the actual sizzling start itself, or some of the other elements that we use along the way, I'll go through and make those videos as we go, but this is just the start. I hope you found it helpful, and thanks for watching. If it can't